Cognitive dissonance theory. What is cognitive dissonance theory? It was developed by Leon Festinger in 1957. Cognitive dissonance happens when there's a discomfort caused by conflicting beliefs and actions. That discomfort leads us to change our feelings or beliefs or behaviors to avoid the distressing feeling. Festinger believed that we have a basic need to avoid dissonance that he referred to as our aversive drive. He hypothesized three mental mechanisms that we use to restore harmony between our thoughts and behaviors. The first is selective exposure prevents dissonance. People tend to stick to our own kind. We often avoid information that's incompatible with our current beliefs. The second hypothesis, post-decision dissonance, creates a need for reassurance. Much like buyer's remorse when purchasing a big money item, we experience strong internal tension and doubt surrounding close call decisions. Three conditions heighten those post-decision dissonance. The more important the issue, the longer an individual delays in choosing between two equally attractive options, and the greater the difficulty in reversing the decision once it's been made. The third hypothesis, minimal justification for action, induces attitude change. The best way to persuade attitude change is to offer them just enough incentive. The $1, $20 experiment. To support his third hypothesis, Festinger collaborated with James Carlsmith to perform their famous $1, $20 experiment. In the experiment, male students were asked to perform a series of boring, tedious tasks for an hour. They were offered either $1 or $20 to persuade a female student in the waiting room outside that the experiment was fun. Afterward, the men that lied for $20 later confessed that they thought the experiment tasks were boring, but the $1 men still maintained that it was fun. Festinger analyzed the results this way. At $20, the cash incentive was enough to motivate the participants to lie. At only $1, the participants had to cognitively justify lying about how fun the experiment was. In changing their attitude about the task, they could convince themselves and the women in the waiting room that the task was actually fun. The $1, $20 experiment has been replicated and modified to reflect three main revisions: self-consistency, personal responsibility for bad outcomes, and self-affirmation. Self-consistency. Aronson, one of Festinger's early graduates, argued that logical inconsistency doesn't necessarily create dissonance. Dissonance is produced by inconsistency between a belief and how we perceive ourselves. For example, if the men in the $1, $20 experiment considered themselves honest and truthful, they would feel more dissonance about having to lie to the waiting participants. 2. Personal responsibility for bad outcomes. Cooper, a Princeton psychologist, argued that inconsistency is not the main motivator for dissonance. Dissonance happens when we're afraid we'll unnecessarily hurt others. It requires knowing ahead of time that the action will have negative impact on someone else while still choosing to go through with it. In the $1, $20 experiment, the men were willingly tricking the women into looking forward to an exciting experience, knowing that they would be disappointed by the reality of the dull result. 3. Affirmation to dissipate dissonance. Steele, a Stanford psychologist, claims that dissonance doesn't necessarily drive people to change their attitude. Some people can justify their behavior by focusing on the positive aspects they see in themselves. High self-esteem is a resource for dissonance reduction. Most people are motivated to maintain an overall positive self-image. Denial, forgetfulness, and rationalizing an incident can be alternatives to attitude change. In the experiment, if the men focused on their good traits, such as, I'm a good student, I volunteer my time, I'm good at XYZ, whatever, they could maintain their self-concept and the dissonance wouldn't be as impactful. Some critiques of cognitive dissonance theory. Some critics argue that the theory is based on assumptions. Festinger never specified a reliable method to measure the degree of dissonance someone experiences, or if they experience it at all. We can't physically observe or objectively measure dissonance. Daryl Bem, a Cornell psychologist, believes that cognitive dissonance theory is too complicated and that self-perception theory, where we judge our attitudes based on our actions, is a better explanation. In an article by Peter Chow, The Psychometric Properties of the Cognitive Dissonance Test, he examines the recently developed cognitive dissonance test, DISS, based on Festinger's theory. The test was developed to help individuals become aware of unconscious discomfort, cognitive dissonance, so that they can take corrective action on a conscious level to eliminate that discomfort. DISS test seeks to determine cognitive dissonance in both interpersonal and external impersonal areas of one's life space. DISS is made up of 4 parts with 25 items in each part. There are 200 true-false items with 25 items in each of 8-part scores. 21 pairs of test items constitute trustworthiness scores. In the sample taken in this article, there were 648 participants. 330 of those were high school students. 318 were college students. 349 were female, 157 were male, and 92 did not disclose their gender. The test results showed strong evidence of internal consistency and met its goal in serving as a point of reference for future researchers using DISS. The test results were also intended to use for educational purposes to predict variables like academic performance and school violence. The second article I studied was by Liu and Kang, titled Cognitive Dissonance, Social Comparison, and Disseminating Untruthful or Negative Truthful EWAM Messages. They explored consumers' intentions to provide untruthful or negative truthful electronic word-of-mouth messages while experiencing cognitive dissonance and after social comparison. The sample involved 480 Taiwanese internet users in a scenario-based experiment. The participants, in nearly equal numbers of men and women, mostly college-educated, were divided into 4 groups of 120. The first group, high cognitive dissonance and upward social comparison. The second group was high cognitive dissonance and downward social comparison. Then low cognitive dissonance and upward social comparison, and low cognitive dissonance and downward social comparison. In the first scenario, participants role-played a scenario where they read an advertisement, imagined they bought the product, which was a camera, and were told they had paid either $490 in the high cognitive dissonance group or $260 in the low cognitive dissonance group, and they would experience low satisfaction with the product in both groups. They were then asked to complete a 20-item cognitive dissonance questionnaire. In the second scenario, participants joined an online discussion forum to discuss the camera purchase. After completing pre-tests in the forum, participants responded to a manipulation check to compare contents in relation to other purchasers' reviews. Then the subjects completed response forms on the topics of truthful, negative, electronic word-of-mouth messages, and untruthful electronic word-of-mouth messages. So what was found? The results from the study found that the consumers that experienced cognitive dissonance didn't intend to give false information, but rather wanted to share their experience with others to relieve their dissonance. They also found that social comparison has a high impact on the dissemination of electronic word-of-mouth messages, depending on the cognitive dissonance the individual is feeling. Internet reviews have a significant impact on consumers' view of products and companies, and it's important for businesses to consider consumer behaviors online and the impact it can have for them and their competitors. Some final thoughts on the articles. The DISS test was developed as a solution to the theory's measurable limitations, and the experiment performed in the second article measured the influence cognitive dissonance has on online product reviews and is a great example of how influential the theory is even today.